What's going on, everyone? We finally got the last part in a 3-part series of changes coming to Path of Exile's 3.16 expansion. And in this last post, they are covering auras, curses, and elemental damage over time. So let's jump right in. And we are starting off with support characters, auras, and other reservation effects. Wow, we're just getting right into it. The problem? The reduced reservation stat provides very little benefit at low values, but becomes very powerful when heavily invested in. This allows players to run every aura in the game. It also forces reduced reservation to be balanced around extreme levels of investment, limiting how useful it can be to characters that do not run enormous numbers of reservation skills. This is definitely true. It always felt awful to have to travel onto the tree and invest a bunch of nodes just to get like 3 or 4% reduced reservation for your character. Finally, characters that heavily invested in reduced reservation in order to run more skills on mana were also able to reserve life extremely effectively as well with no further investment, rendering this the only sensible way to play most heavily reservation-focused builds. Their solution is to replace reservation reduction with reservation efficiency. When stacked, reservation efficiency does not allow for infinite auras. This can be given out much more liberally as a result, letting characters run additional reservation effects with only a couple of sources of reservation efficiency. The average character benefits, but the top end of extreme reservation has been made significantly weaker. That all sounds fucking amazing. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are really upset and feel like targeted that GGG is ruining their fun, but to be honest, this is something that has been out of hand for a long time now and definitely needed to be addressed. And to the people who were taking advantage of it for this entire time, you got to enjoy it. You got to have a really strong character that buffed other people. I'm sure you got to farm an insane amount of currency, and you were able to do this for so long. So there's no reason to hate the game or get super angry about it. Just play something new. And holy mac and cheese, there are a lot of specifics here. Modifiers to reservation have been replaced with reservation efficiency. Reservation efficiency works by dividing the cost of the reservation effect. 100% increased reservation efficiency would halve the cost of all auras. 50% reservation efficiency cuts down costs enough to let you reserve an additional 50% reservation aura. Wow. I'm curious how this affects the top end of builds. I'm assuming it just means you can't get enough to just keep stacking more and more auras, but this does mean that you'll be able to easily, hopefully, fit in another aura or two in your just standard build. Passives and item modifiers with reduced reservation have been replaced with increased mana reservation efficiency, generally at double the value of the previous reduced reservation value, but sometimes with different values for balance reasons. This means that a small amount of reservation investment is more impactful than before, while high investment doesn't allow as many auras to be used. The vast majority of reservation efficiency offered is now mana specific in order to prevent reserving both life and mana being the default choice for a build heavily invested in reservation. Generic reservation efficiency and life reservation efficiency are still available on some item modifiers. So what does this mean for low life builds? I guess as long as the Prism Guardian hasn't changed, then low life builds probably haven't changed that much either. But if there are significant changes to something like Arrogance support, then it could have a pretty big effect on low life setups. If not mentioned below, all sources that previously provided reduced reservation, including for specific skills or types of skills, now provide increased mana reservation efficiency at twice the value of the reduced reservation they used to give. Modifiers on existing items are affected by these changes. There's a bunch of stuff here. I don't want to go over every single one, but I'll leave the post in the description below for those of you who do, but I do want to point out some of the ones that stood out to me. First, the corrupted implicit modifier on jewels that previously provided 1% reduced reservation now provides 2% increased reservation efficiency, and it's not specific to mana. 1% to 2% isn't massive, but if you have a bunch of jewels with this corrupted implicit on it, then that could add up to quite a bit. The Shaper and Hunter Influence Shield modifiers that previously granted 10 to 15% reduced reservation of socketed gems now grant 15 to 20% increased reservation efficiency of socketed gems. And here we go. The Prism Guardian now grants socketed gems have 30% increased reservation efficiency, instead of socketed gems have 25% reduced reservation. This all sounds kind of like a buff, but I'm also a little stupid, so I don't think I understand 100% how this works, and I probably won't fully get it until I look at it in PoB. But I'm really interested to see just how many auras you'll be able to stack on your standard character now. Okay, let's go on to the next problem. Characters specialized in maximizing the power of auras provide an absolutely insane amount of damage and defense to party members, making a party with an aura specialized character so much more effective than one without. The solution? Remove sources of aura effect from cluster jewels and move the aura cluster jewels type to small cluster jewels so it is no longer possible to continuously stack aura effect for your party. Introduce a new cluster jewel notable to increase the effect of your auras on you for builds that are building auras for their own power. These are all great changes. The aura cluster jewel type can now be found on small cluster jewels rather than medium cluster jewels. This makes it more costly and less impactful to stack large number of aura cluster jewels. The small passives now grant 6% increased reservation efficiency instead of increased aura effect. Cluster jewel notable passive skills have all had aura effect removed. The increased aura effect of auras on you from the Purposeful Harbinger Cluster Jewel notable now only applies to your own auras effect on you. The Master of Command Cluster Jewel notable passive skill now grants 10% increased effect of non-curse auras from your skill on enemies, previously 50%. Or 15%. A new Cluster Jewel notable has been added that grants 10% increased effect of your auras on you. Cluster Jewel notable passives that grant reduced reservation to specific auras now grant high amounts of reservation efficiency to that aura, as well as improving the secondary bonus that notable gave. So it says high amounts of reservation efficiency to that aura. So all this stuff sounds like it's still going to be very good for your normal player. This all, once again, just completely guts AuraBotters. And just as a quick side note here, I have been playing a lot of Diablo 2 Resurrected lately, and I've been playing a Necromancer, which is one of my favorite classes. And for those of you who don't know, the Necromancer has a very supportive role in a party. Obviously, they can have a lot of summons that just create meat shields for you and your friends, but they also have access to curses. And sure, because the game is so old, running around and cursing things isn't particularly fun, but it is an active playstyle that requires you to choose which curse you want to use at any given moment. You could use one like Lower Resist to help break an immunity for your elemental-based friends, or you could use something like Amplify Damage for your barbarians and paladins that are dealing high physical amounts of damage. But either way, it creates a more active playstyle for you in a party role, whereas the AuraBotter, you don't really do shit. So I would really like to see them kind of improve on, or maybe change the way curses work. Maybe they can make curses more interesting for party play. But let's continue. Added Cluster Jewel notable passives that grant high amounts of reservation efficiency to specific auras, as well as some other small bonus. For example, Zealotry has 60% increased reservation efficiency and 10% increased effect of consecrated ground you create. That's pretty cool. And lastly, the Jinxed Juju Amulet now grants 5 to 10% increased effect of your curses, previously 10 to 15%, and 5 to 10% increased effect of non-curse auras from your skills. So they nerfed curses? Are they buffing the shit out of them or something? I guess we'll find out in the next section. Support characters and curses. The problem. Characters specialized in maximizing the number and power of curses provide far too much damage and defense to party members, making a party with a curse specialized character so much more effective than one without. Yikes. Solution. Make Curse Cluster Jewels a small cluster jewel with many of the notables reworked to benefit specific curses significantly, greatly improving a regular character wanting to maximize their curse of choice. Make significant chances to Deodri's skin as it applies many curses at almost no cost. The Curse Cluster Jewel type can now be found on small cluster jewels rather than medium ones, okay, just like the Aura ones. To make these jewels more useful for characters using only 1 or 2 curses, we greatly improved the Cluster Jewel notables, granting benefits to specific curses as well as added new ones. However, they can no longer be found on cluster jewels other than curse type ones. I gotta be completely honest, this isn't something I've messed around with a lot, so I don't really know offhand what other ones they can be found on. So yeah, I don't really give a shit. And here's a list of the Cluster Jewel notable passives that were changed. Evil Eye, Whispers of Death, and Dark Discourse cluster have been reworked as new curse-themed notable passives. In general, curse effect that applies to all curses no longer exists on Cluster Jewel notable passives. Lord of Drought, Blizzard Caller, Tempt the Storm, Misery Everlasting, and Exploit Weakness all now grant 40% increased curse effect of specific curses. Previously was 25%. Forbidden Words no longer grant 5% increased effect of your curses, and now grants 20% increased reservation efficiency of curse aura skills. Previously 4% reduced reservation. I gotta say, I've never played an AuraBotter before or a curse-focused character like this, so I don't know how big of a deal it is to transfer these things to small cluster jewels instead of medium ones, and how that will somehow make them more powerful to your standard character. But I think it's just because of the amount of investment you would have to put in to put a large jewel in, then get 2 medium ones, and then 2 small ones. So it makes it much more difficult for you to just stack a bunch of these smaller ones. But for you AuraBotters out there, feel free to yell at me in the comments or let me know how this shit works. I'm not entirely sure if too many players are going to be using these small cluster jewels to buff their curses, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see just how effective they are. They say here that they added new curse cluster jewel notable passives that benefit Doom, Marks, and Hexes that previously didn't have their own notables, such as Punishment, Elemental Weakness, Temporal Chains, and Enfeeble. For example, 20% chance for Hexes to be applied at maximum Doom, and Hexes have 50% increased Doom gain rate. That's pretty neat. Let's quickly talk about Deodri's skin, and then we're going to go on to the next section. There is a little section here talking about the other uniques that they've rebalanced. If you guys want to read it, again, the post will be posted in the description below, so you can read that stuff there. Deodri's skin now grants hexes from socketed skills can apply 5 additional curses. It previously granted hexes from socketed skills ignore curse limit. This is so replica Deodri's damning has some downside with using it. Now grants 20% less effect of your curses for all skills instead of reduced curse effect of socketed skills triggered with the Summon Deodri's Effigy skill. The Summon Deodri's Effigy skill now has a short cast time, previously instant. Its cooldown has been removed, previously 0.5 seconds, and now has a mana cost. Existing items will be affected by this curse limit change, though they will only have 20% less curse effect of curses triggered with Summon Deodri's Effigy. Gotta be honest, all this aura stuff seems cool. Like I said, never played it, never really cared about it. Honestly, they could have kept it in the game, and I probably wouldn't have cared that much. I was kind of hoping that what they would do is figure out a way to make it so party players could still have a similar playstyle like being an AuraBotter and be like being supportive, while also nerfing this stuff so they could make all this shit more useful to your average player, which is, I think, more important than the handful of people that are playing AuraBotters, to be honest with you. I think their intention is to make sure that these people who enjoy the AuraBotting playstyle still have a role within a party, but they probably didn't have enough time in this update to get to it, unless if it's posted here at the bottom, but it looks like we're going to damage over time next, so I don't think it is. But maybe in 3.17 we'll see some more changes for people that enjoy playing that particular role with their friends. Okay, on to elemental damage over time. The problem? The elemental damage over time effects of cold damage over time, burning, and ignite are too dependent on elemental overload and elemental equilibrium. And elemental equilibrium is just not fun to use, in my opinion. Ignites are too dependent on ignite damage multipliers on skills, making skills without ignite multipliers too weak to use ignite with. Yeah, ignite is really difficult to scale. The solution is to greatly improve the base strength of ignite, burning, and cold damage over time, while making elemental overload and elemental equilibrium less powerful or require more investment with damage over time skills. Rebalance skills that could apply ignite effects around the new base damage of ignite and remove the ignite damage multipliers. What? Is this just going to make it easier for us to, well, not easier, but less complicated to scale damage over time? I like the idea. This seems to be a kind of a common theme, like with defenses becoming a little bit more streamlined and like focused to sections of the tree and removing things like ignite damage multipliers. I feel like it takes a little bit of the thinking out of the equation and makes the game a little bit easier, maybe? I know a lot of people love Path of Exile for the amount of complexity that it has, but I think there's a certain point where complexity and tedium and frustration kind of like meet up, you know, and too much complexity going one way kind of creates too much frustration and tedium. I think there's a point where there can be just the right amount of complexity and just the right amount of fun, right? I think it's really hard to get that right, and I know some people just really love the complexity part of Path of Exile, but I wouldn't mind seeing the game being dumbed down just a little bit, or at least help us in the right direction sometimes, you know? Holy ball sack. There are a lot of specifics here. I don't know if we're going to go over every single one, so maybe we'll read some and then I'll try to pick out some of the more interesting ones. It looks to me like a lot of these skills were significantly buffed, but we have to keep in mind that they also removed ignite damage multipliers. Player Ignite now inherently deals 150% more damage than before. Previously 50% of base damage over 4 seconds, now 125% of base damage over 4 seconds. Holy shit. Cold damage over time skills now deal more damage. Okay, and then we just have the new numbers here, which is pretty cool. Then we have burning skills now deal more damage. We have Searing Bond, Scorching Ray, Righteous Fire, yada yada yada, Flame Ball, Flame Wall. They all do more damage now. Many skills that had an ignite multiplier have had that multiplier removed. The skill has been balanced to compensate for this if necessary. Certain skills have been rebalanced due to the change to base ignite damage, taking into account whether they're able to take full advantage of elemental overload now. Note that examples below do not include the effect of elemental overload or elemental equilibrium, hence why the ignite value is much higher for many of the skills. Well, I don't know what elemental overload or elemental equilibrium do now, but okay. See, let's just take a look at Fireball, because Fireball was a very common skill for ignite builds. Fireball no longer has 50 to 88% more damage with ignite. It now has 25% chance to ignite at all gem levels. Because of base ignite damage changes, ignite with this skill is now 33% higher. I actually like this because before I always hated feeling like I had to use certain skills if I wanted to do an ignite build. I'm hoping this means that we'll have more freedom with what skills we can use, and I think it will, but it was always kind of boring and uninspired to be like, oh, well, I want to do an ignite build. Well, there's Fireball. Okay. What else? Well, there's Burning Arrow. Okay, cool. And then there's obviously the other like weird mechanics like the Hex Blast ignite build that I believe was popular a while ago. Or like grabbing the node in the Elemental Ascendancy that makes all of your damage ignite and just scaling a bunch of damage. What is this? I see Shattering Steel? Why is Shattering Steel in here? Shattering Steel now has projectiles deal up to 100% more damage with hits per steel shard consumed at the start of their movement, lowering this bonus as they travel further. Previously hits and ailments. Because of base ignite damage changes, ignite with this skill is now 16.7% lower than consuming 2 shards. The skill is not intended to work well with ignite, so it doesn't justify having its own unique multiplier stat. Oh, well, good thing they noticed that. An Explosive Arrow. Explosive Arrow now has explosion deals 5% more damage with hits per explosive arrow on target. Because of base ignite damage changes, ignite with this skill is now 66.7% higher with 10 arrows on the target. Ignite with the skill is now 25% higher with 20 arrows on the target. So this seems like a pretty big buff for explosive arrow. I mean, it seems like pretty big buffs for everything across the board, honestly. Okay, the Elemental Overload Keystone passive skill now gives more hit and ailment elemental damage to skills if they crit in the last 8 seconds. This means that you can't use a second rapidly hitting skill, making a small amount of critical chance investment much more important to skills taking advantage of elemental overload. So I think what a lot of people were doing before were taking Storm Brand and throwing increased critical strikes on it and getting free elemental overload procs that way. This seems like, and like it said, you just have to invest more into crit to get the crit chance from your actual skill to gain the benefit from this Keystone. I really like this change and I think it'll be healthy for damage over time builds. The Elemental Equilibrium Keystone passive skill now applies 25% exposure of the elements not hit with, removing exposure of the elements you hit with. It's now an easy way to apply a strong exposure effect rather than a huge damage boost that we balanced elemental damage over time skills around. Some other skills have been reviewed because of these changes. So the old Elemental Equilibrium would temporarily give enemies plus 25% resistances to whatever they were recently hit with. But it seems like here that if you're applying exposure in some way, that all it does is remove that exposure that was applied with whatever ailment that they were recently hit with. That is, if I'm understanding this correctly. So it doesn't seem like there's actually this huge innate downside to using Elemental Equilibrium, because all you'd be missing out on is just exposure. Whereas before, enemies were getting a huge buff to whatever elemental damage they were recently hit with. Also, the biggest takeaway here is that exposure on enemies does not stack. So the 25% exposure will be all you get out of this Keystone now. But before, with Elemental Equilibrium, it lowered elemental resistances by 50%, which you could keep lowering to do more and more damage to enemies. I like this change a lot because it's a 1-point investment for 25% exposure, but it requires some playstyle changes to take full advantage of it. But if you still want exposure without having to deal with all the side effects of Elemental Equilibrium, you can invest into things like Cluster Jewels. All in all, I think this is really good. Next, they will be looking at pure elemental minions to determine what changes are needed here. They moved the Elemental Equilibrium Keystone passive to the Ranger section of the passive skill tree, where there is much less existing access to exposure or elemental builds, and access to skills that rotate elements, such as Wild Strike. That's actually not a bad thing. Maybe. It might be kind of annoying for Marauders, maybe, Chieftains that might want to use it, but I don't know. Make sure you guys let me know in the comments what you think about it. Next up, they are saying more scaling options have been added to damage over time builds on the passive skill tree and items, raising the top end of damage over time for well-geared characters. So it sounds like damage over time will be really popular this league, but honestly, when is damage over time not popular? There are now 5 tiers of the global damage over time multiplier suffix modifier that rolls on all weapons, going up to 26% on one-handed weapons and 45% 20% on two-handed weapons. The faster ignite, poison, and bleed modifiers on influenced boots now roll up to 10 to 12%, previously 8 to 10. So it looks like just damage over time in general on gear and some passives buffed. Good stuff here. If you guys want to read through it, I'll post it for you. The next problem, Burning Arrow is too complex for a level 1 skill. Redesign the skill without a secondary stacking burning effect, but with high added fire damage against ignited enemies. No longer has a stacking burning effect, now deals 150% base damage at gym level 1, up to 214% damage at gym level 20. Now adds 3 to 4 fire damage to attacks against ignited enemies at gym level 1, up to 201 to 302 fire damage at gym level 20. Now has an attack speed of 90% of base, previously 100. Now has 25% chance to ignite, previously 50. I've personally always loved Burning Arrow, so these changes are pretty interesting to me. It might actually be my league starter if we can figure out a way to make it work. And lastly, Ignite builds don't have a way to focus their damage on bosses, forcing balance to be the same for clear speed damage and boss damage. Okay, their solution, change Flame Surge and introduce a new attack-based mechanic to be able to deal much more burning damage to a targeted enemy. Flame Surge is getting a new burning ground mechanic that deals damage based on ignites on the target. We're investigating a similar mechanic for attacks. It's about time Flame Surge got looked at. I think it's a little interesting that they're just changing Flame Surge to now just be the single target go-to skill for, it sounds like, all Ignite builds. But for those of you who don't know, I was playing a Flame Surge build last league on my Twitch channel, and it was kind of painful, to be completely honest. So I'm glad this change is happening. And they closed the post by saying, we want to stress that the above list and posts from the last 2 days aren't final. There are plenty of other balance topics that we plan to cover in the 3.16 announcement and patch notes. Thanks for reading through to the end, and please let us know your feedback on these changes and this new approach to communication. Well guys, I'm pretty happy with all the stuff that I read here. I'm sorry that I couldn't give more insight into the aura botting changes, but I'm not an aura botter. So if you are, make sure to leave a comment below to let me know how angry you are. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check me out over on my Twitch channel where I stream 3 to 4 days a week, and I'll definitely be streaming this upcoming Path of Exile League. And thanks for watching guys.